my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 3, and that, on top of mum's story as well, telling my mum that my daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia was an incredibly difficult thing to do, because it destroyed my mum. It was actually because she thought it was a familiar or link. It was hereditary in some description. It's not. It's just unreal that the 3 of us that have all had leukemia have got a different type, and there is no link there at all between them. Absolutely remarkable. But when Rachel was diagnosed, I felt totally powerless. And I mean, totally powerless. There was absolutely nothing I could do, say, or get involved in that would change the outcome of what the doctors and the nurses would do. I formed the Forces Children's Support Group. I'd ridden from Land's End to John O'Groats. I was doing my artificer training at the same time, because that was the only way that I can help. It's something that, whilst I'm physically able to do, I'll either do it myself or I'll have a word with somebody else and ask them to put their hands in their pockets as well.
So Brian, throughout your life, one theme that I keep hearing is resilience. So talk to me about resilience. What does it mean to you, and why do you think it's important?
Being resistant to external factors and knowing how to deal with the multitude of things that life throws at you, and still being able to carry on doing what you need to do and what you want to do, I think for me is what really is defined by resilience. And we all deal with it in different ways. Some of us, and some of the people watching this, will have had significantly far worse personal issues, health issues in their own particular lives, and have still carried on and delivered and exceeded, not only just delivered, but exceeded in whatever they're trying to achieve or do. And the ability to not be knocked off your, whatever it is your focus is, your task, your path, your journey, and how you prevent yourself being knocked off that path or journey, I think is and epitomises what personal resilience is. I don't know there's a definition, for instance.
So what advice would you give to anybody then who wanted to develop their resilience?
I think that's difficult to answer easily. I think life experience in particular, and having exposed oneself to lots of different experiences over time, may give people better tools for dealing with, you know, the journey that they're particularly on. I personally like being out of my comfort zone, and I like I'm quite happy walking down a canal towpath and getting absolutely saturated and soaking wet, knowing actually I need to get from A to B, but it really doesn't matter. My skin's waterproof. I'll get cold, but actually enjoy the journey as well. So I like being out of my comfort zone, whether it's at work, leisure, and I think that often, sometimes the more people can do things which are outside their comfort zone, I think that gives them a little bit of a life experience which they may not need straight away, but they may need 10, 20, 30 years down. And when they're exposed to something, they can go, do you know what? I remember being in this situation somewhere similar before, or somebody taught me that such and such, and I'll just use that. And if it helps a little bit, it'll help a little bit. But life experience, and the more life experience you get through exposure to different aspects, facets of life, I think can help your own personal resilience. I can't describe in simple terms why I think I'm quite a resilient person. As you'll know from earlier, I don't get too fazed or flustered by by things which are outside of my control anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. I drive around at 70 miles an hour now. I never used to. I've taken back the control that I need, so that when external factors are jumping into my path or affect my life, I've got a far better handle on how to deal with it mentally and physically occasionally than I've ever had before.
So Brian, if Brian Penfold from 20, 30 years ago walked in through the door now, what would you say to him?
I think two things. You're going to have a fantastic career and, soak every single moment up. I have no regrets of my career whatsoever. Yes, I've had disappointments, but I don't have any regrets at all. But as far as my health is concerned, as soon as I noticed the health of the previous me deteriorate, I would drag him kicking and screaming at the first sign of something that was clearly untoward, rather than, as I did, allow almost years, well, it was years to pass and live through that hell well before it happened. I mean, even now, today, the effects of my leukemia, the symptoms associated with that are still prevalent. As an example, for best part of 10 years now, I've not been able to breathe properly through my nose, and I have a sore throat most of the time. I've been to see 6 ENT consultants. I've been trying to get a solution to a problem which mainstream NHS clinical pathways won't address. Quite simple. You're an enigma in the clinical side of life. So I paid, prior to Christmas, I paid for a private assessment, an ENT consultant, and a specialist in immunology. And so I had to go again. So I'd exhausted everything in the NHS. I've been using sprays and all sorts of stuff to no avail. I get periods of normality, and it'd be fantastic for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then it come crashing down again. I physically can't breathe through my nose through congestion. So I saw this immunologist on the week before Christmas, and he had time, and he sat down and he said, "Look, I understand you're an engineer by profession." He said, "I'm going to draw you some drawings then." So he did, and he started drawing on a sheet of A4 paper about parts of the way that my bone marrow and my blood work, particularly around mast cells. And he says, "Has anybody ever discussed this with you before?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, you've got triggers here and triggers here. I can't drink, for instance. I've stopped drinking 10 years ago. It doesn't really chime well with the chemo, and it causes massive congestion. Alcohol in particular just brings on the symptoms." So he starts to draw this drawing, and he said, "The reason this happens is because of this." And I looked at that and I said, "I can see exactly what you're saying." And then he asked me another question about how I use nasal sprays, and he told me that for the last 10 years I've been doing it wrong. So he said, "Right, we're going to try you on this drug, and you need to be able to do your nasal sprays properly." Since Christmas, and since taking new drug, doing my nasal sprays properly, and as you can see from today, I've been able to not only resolve 90% of my congestion, but I don't get the sore throats anymore. Almost overnight. And it's 10 years that's taken me to convince people that there must be a solution there somewhere. And it's dogged determination to the point of having to put my hand in my own pocket and say, I'm going to pay for time when the NHS doesn't afford you necessarily that opportunity. And I gave up my work with the Institute of Engineering and Technology. I was a volunteer lecturer for them, but I couldn't do it. When COVID struck, we all moved on to Zoom. We were doing training by Zoom, and I just couldn't get through the day. You speak differently on Zoom for some bizarre reason. It's weird, but you speak different. I couldn't get through the day without having such a sore throat that it would take me days to recover. And here I am. So for the first time in over a decade, I seem to have now got a new strategy, which does appear to be working. Fingers crossed.
That's fantastic. Dale, talk to me about anxiety, and we touched on health anxiety a little bit earlier on. So talk to me about your coping strategies for that and what advice you'd give to anybody who finds themselves perhaps in a downward spiral of anxiety.
I mean, I've been on that spiral, what I would consider to be a proper downward spiral a couple of times. Not too far down the spiral, but knowing that I was in that anxious anxiety spiral. I go back to my stop button analogy, really, is that recognizing that you're actually feeling anxious about something, knowing that in most circumstances it's actually okay to be anxious about something. We're all nervous or anxious about something, but knowing when that's starting to become normal, where anxiety is actually starting to take over, and that starts to become the predominant factor rather than actually the normal things that we do, knowing that at that point you've got to, as I do, put my hand up and say, I need help here, regardless of whatever that help may well be relevant to you, but knowing that actually you know, anxiety is a part of day-to-day existence, part of what we do. Being anxious about going into a new situation or a situation that's potentially somewhere where you may lose the control that you have is you know, something that we have to deal with. So for me, knowing I'm getting anxious about something, but knowing actually that's okay to be anxious about that, but when it starts to take over and starts to dominate to a point where you're having to change your behaviours as a result, that's where you need to go in, I think, talk to somebody, help in any shape or form, guys, whether it's your best mate, your friend, your wife, your partner, whatever, because otherwise it will just continue to grow. I'm not a behaviourist, so, you know, I'm not clinically trained in this, but there are people out there that can help. Recognizing that you need help and asking for help are being two different things. Some people struggle to ask for help, but actually know they need help. Just occasionally we have to reach in and pull them out as well.
So one thing that I was really impressed by when I read your CV was I noticed it said that you have an adaptability to tackle new challenges. So just give me an overview of some of the challenges that you've had to face and how you've adapted to them, and what you think, what you can share with us and what we can learn from that.
I think every day's a challenge, a small challenge, a big challenge. We all have to cope with lots of different things. Career-wise, I've had to pick myself up and move in another direction. Health-wise, I've had to overcome what's happened to me in order to live my life essentially happy rather than languishing on what could have been. And I think for me, when I look back at the jobs and things I've had, not only have I been very lucky to have some of those jobs, but some of them have been proper challenges, i.e. they've been targets and objectives which have been set to me and I've had to deliver against. But there's other occasions where I've been put into an environment where I really didn't know what to do next. But no, there was no do nothing option. It was a case of, you've got to do something. Closing a successful business based on a moral and ethical decision was really difficult. But the so what from that was, once the decision's made, now what do we do? And planning what we do next. Overcoming a challenge. What's the scale of the challenge? How do you approach the challenge? Is it a big challenge? Is it a little challenge? I mean, there's so much that you can talk about, but finding strength within yourself goes back to something we were discussing previously about being able to put one foot in front of the other. Again, there are no tools or techniques, but life experience in particular, and knowing that yes, you can succeed. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easy. My father used to say to me and to my little son, one of his mantras was, "You can do it." And my mum used to say, "For every sad moment, it's a happy moment missed." And she's absolutely right. And so bringing those two together, knowing that, yes, you can achieve things which you didn't think were possible, but it requires time, it requires effort, it often requires help to achieve that. One example I give, I've said to somebody previously, and I think might be useful now, is after my accident in Iraq, I was flying at that point, flying gliders, flying light aircraft. I had an American PPL. I was flying at national level in competitions and and part of the Army gliding team. I absolutely loved my flying, absolutely loved it. So suddenly somebody saying, "By the way, your left arm doesn't work like it used to," came down as it wasn't a real thump, but there was a realization that as a glider pilot in particular, your left arm is really, really important for landing and taking off, but for landing. And being able to moderate air brakes on approach was something that you needed, not just to use your left hand, but you needed a level of finesse on your left hand as well. And I, along with a neck injury, realised that my ability to fly competitions and land in a rough field landing with a neck that was held together with metalwork was probably not a sensible thing to do. And actually my ability to fly safely, not using my left hand as I used to, was going to be a real challenge. I took the decision at the time, based on my neck, not on my arm, to stop flying at all, which was a blow. I sold my aircraft, had my own glider, but it was done for the right reasons. I didn't have to fly. I wanted to fly. I didn't need to fly. So yeah, it was quite sad, and I'd look up at the sky and go, "God, I'd love to be up there right now." But actually it was done for the right reasons. Now I've got, 99% of my arm back, effectiveness of my arm back. Can't always trust it, but all the time, life's moved on a lot, and I've got new things in my life, and I've got new challenges. And fundamentally, I like giving back to other people. I like being able to impart knowledge. They can do what they like with it, but it's great fun giving something to somebody else. When I was instructor in gliding, being able to teach somebody how to fly a glider and then sit back behind them knowing that you just imparted that knowledge to somebody else. They may have overcome their fear of heights, their fear of flying and everything, and you can sit back there thinking, yeah, that's really good, wasn't it? And you don't need to take anything away from the fact that you've just given them that knowledge.
So speaking of giving back, you've been awarded the British Empire medals for services to charities. So tell me a bit about that story, because there's actually a reason behind it as to why you got involved with volunteering in the first place.
My mother was diagnosed with leukemia when I was 20, first time round, acute myeloid leukemia. She went in and out of remission, so that was in the sort of late 80s. Treatments weren't as developed as they are now, and she ebbed and flowed through treatments, through remission, relapse, treatment, etc., etc. And I felt quite powerless really to help, but I was away in Germany at the time and quite detached from mum's journey, although it came together a bit later on. My daughter was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 3, and she was diagnosed in 1988. And that, on top of mum's story as well, telling my mum that my daughter had been diagnosed with leukemia was an incredibly difficult thing to do, because it destroyed my mum. It was actually because she thought it was a familiar or link. It was hereditary in some description. It's not. It's just unreal that the 3 of us that have all had leukemia have got a different type, and there is no link there at all between them. Absolutely remarkable. But when Rachel was diagnosed, she was treated at the hospital in Southampton, and I felt totally powerless. And I mean, totally powerless. There was absolutely nothing I could do, say, or get involved in that would change the outcome of what the doctors and the nurses would do. The only thing that my brain told me that you could do is to raise some money for charity to help these people that were helping Rachel. So that started what's become a lifelong journey, I suppose, of charitable fundraising. Back in between 88 and 91, I formed the Forces Children's Support Group. I'd ridden from Land's End to John O'Groats. I was doing my artificer training at the same time, and raising lots of money for charity by doing absolutely crazy things. Because that was the only way that I can help. And whilst the initial focus was with Wessex Cancer Trust, because that was the trust that was supporting Southampton Hospital in particular, it subsequently expanded to everything. And last year I was walking for Prostate Cancer UK. So yeah, it's something that, whilst I'm physically able to do, I'll either do it myself or I'll have a word with somebody else and ask them to put their hands in their pockets as well.
So it was a coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
For you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't do anything about this situation. What can I do? And if that's, walking for a long time, running, whatever, if this physical frame of mine is capable of doing it, I'll generally have a go.
So it's your way of overcoming adversity in a way.
Absolutely, yeah. There is no do nothing option for me, essentially, and I'll find a way round it, through it, over it, underneath it if I need to. Most times, for me, the knowledge of being able to say, "There's some money, go and do something that I can't do with it," is really powerful. These physicians that were involved needed money for research, etc., etc., as many organisations do. They're externally funded, so being able to give them a pot of money and say, "Go and do more with this," it's just absolutely fabulous. You get a buzz out of that, and that's all you need, isn't it?
So Brian, what advice would you give to anybody then who is facing a challenge that seems insurmountable?
I think it's important to recognise that some challenges you can't achieve everything you want to do. You can certainly try, but there are some things which you're just not going to succeed at. I didn't succeed at my Army pilot's course, but it was in me to be able to succeed, but I just didn't. So I failed that particular challenge. I think recognising that failure is a credible outcome of a challenge from the outset before you start, and managing your expectations at the start is really, really powerful. Doesn't matter if you're trying to row the Atlantic, or trying to overcome a health-related issue. You're not necessarily going to overcome the totality of the challenge that you might set yourself. And I think it's really important that you manage your own expectations right from the outset.
So Brian, talk to me about decision making. You've had to make many decisions throughout your career and throughout your life under pressure. Are there any particular tools or strategies that you use to make a decision under pressure, or any advice you could give?
That's an interesting question, because I don't think most of us think about how we make our own decisions. I don't have a set of go-to tools. Many of the decisions are subconscious decisions we make. So I think it's quite difficult to explain as a piece of advice how to make decisions to people. There's no go-to tools, but there's some things I do and there's some things I think about. Invariably risk. As a safety engineer, essentially risk, whether it's dynamic risk or whatever risk, I look at the risk of not achieving or delivering an outcome as part of that decision making. Important decisions require consideration though. Decisions affecting your health require consideration. informed decisions rather than ill-informed. And if you need to get advice to help you make your decision making, I think that's not only absolutely right, but it's a good thing to do. No reason why you shouldn't.
So Brian, throughout your long and distinguished military career and then working as a company board level director when you left the armed forces, you've been in many leadership positions. So tell me what you think makes a good leader.
I think that's quite a difficult question to answer because I think, as an example, so leadership and management are subtly different but interrelated facets of the way that people take people on journeys with them and make decisions. So I think, and I don't want to get into the debates between the difference between the two, but in terms of leadership, for me, it's about people rather than it is the task, whereas management is more focused on the task than people are, then leadership is focused on the people that deliver the task. I use an analogy as a where I have had to take people on the journey with me, and that requires leadership. It's not always an easy task. Knowing that you've got a journey to go on and you want everybody to be on that journey with you. The analogy that I've used actually in business as a real example is people taking people on a train ride with you. You're in charge, essentially, as a company director, you're in charge of not only the train or the tracks, but the route, the destination, the station, the platform, and every aspect of that. In order to achieve what you want to do, absolutely vital that you take as many people on the train with you. And you need to actually be on the train as well. Not just driving the train, but you need to be on the train as well. And I think leadership is essentially understanding that you own the totality of that. And most importantly, those people need to be on the same train that you're on, because if they suddenly diverge somewhere on a different track, they've got on the wrong train, they're on the wrong platform, you're not taking those people with you. May not always be an enjoyable trip, and it may not be the trip necessary that those people that are on that train want to actually be on. When we closed our business in 2020, I can guarantee that 70%, 80% of people didn't see the decision making behind the difficult decision that was taken and didn't understand, but we still had to take them on the journey with us and explain to them why we'd taken the decision that we took, even though they didn't necessarily agree, want to hear it, but we still had to try as much as we can to explain why we'd taken the decision that we needed to. So I think that really encompasses elements of leadership, whichever walk of life that you're on, whichever part of your journey's on, taking people with you is absolutely essential.
And what tools did you use then to persuade those people to follow your vision and perhaps manage conflicts when they disagreed with your vision?
I think you're going to get conflict in all walks of life, unfortunately. I tend to shy away from conflict. This is the most powerful communication device on the planet. Some of us have, over time, developed a way of speaking and talking, and the ability to choose our words, because communication is so powerful. And the words we choose to use can result in almost instantaneous conflict, or it can almost result in instantaneous harmony by the choice of what we do. And that's invariably a function of our values and beliefs, etc., which allow us to communicate what we need to. So being able to explain to people tone, intonation, words, choice of words, such that you're mindful of other people's often polarized opinions and views, but establish communication between people which is respectful of the fact that there can be opposing views, but done in such a manner where the opportunity or the chance of hostility is negligible, down to zero. You can still achieve with this. Not every time, you're not always going to achieve the outcome that everybody wants, and you can't please all the people all the time, but you can, through this very powerful communication tool, And that's how I see it. Everybody has the ability to use that. So being able to manage conflict and be able to stand back occasionally, take a break occasionally, walk away occasionally, I think are just another parts of the toolkits that we've all got the potential to learn and use.
And some of your roles then involve negotiation as well. So talk to me about successful negotiation.
Successful negotiation. That's an interesting challenge because in business in particular, with some negotiations, you have to be prepared to walk away without achieving what you set out to achieve, because that's the best outcome. The best resolution is no decision, or a decision that goes against you. Not ideal, but you need to be prepared to walk away. I think house sales are a really good example of that. When you're buying a new house and you've got your heart set on a house and you know it's right, but for instance, it's just outside your budget and you really, really shouldn't afford it. The thing might be best to walk away rather than commit to that extra £10,000 that you really can't afford, and it's going to impact you downstream. So in terms of negotiations, you're trying to achieve as much as you can collective opinion on a decision. Is there a particular set of tools? Not particularly, but that I use anyway in particular, but I think avoiding conflict, I don't like conflict at the best of times, and using words, expressions, phrases, tones that explain to others that yes, their views and opinions are potentially equally valid, but there has to be some form of reconciliation. There may, the phrase compromise, I'm not even using it, but essentially we're talking about that there may be a 90% give in one direction and a 10% give in the other direction. It's invariably about compromise.
So Brian, what are you working on at the moment then in terms of self-development and your aspirations?
Cool, that's a deep question. I've got a number of projects on the go, many of which I'm learning from, and it's quite interesting actually. So I'm a Freemason. I'm really involved in Freemasonry. I've managed to bring together a disparate group of volunteers at the moment to manage and stage the world's longest handshake relay, which we're doing in June this year, working with people from very, very different backgrounds, all set on achieving a task, and how you deal with those people, and how the things that in my life and in the jobs that I've had don't work, and recognize them. People think and want to do things ways that I've never considered, and bringing those into my toolbox has been really quite useful, as well as achieving the objective. Watching how other people do things and thinking, I've never considered doing it that way before, but I will in the future, has been really quite powerful. But I like to be active, so I'm also restoring a 1966 Jaguar Mark II at the moment, which allows me to get my fingers dirty, get my hands on an old piece of engineering, which, although I'm not a mechanical engineer, I will dig into most of it and I will have a go at most of it, and that's good fun as well.
And what does the future hold for you?
I retired in 2020 after my second cancer diagnosis, and I said to myself at that point then I wasn't going to work again. There's a hint of a potential part-time job opportunity which I might take up, but actually a lot of my spare time now is helping out other charities and other volunteer organisations. I'm an ambassador for Blood Cancer UK. I do a lot of work with the Institute of Engineering and Technology. Freemasonry takes up a lot of my spare time. I'm involved with Mission Motorsport now. So I have the ability to get up in the morning, most mornings, and decide what I'm going to do that day. There's clearly a bit of planning involved around holidays and finances and the such like, but and I like to talk about being the master of my own destiny. I like bright ideas. I've got a couple of things in the pipeline that I'm working on, which literally came out of nowhere. Whether they come to fruition or not, I don't know. But I could have another idea tomorrow. We'll see where that goes.
So Brian, what do you think, or what would you like anybody listening or watching this to take away from your incredibly inspirational and remarkable story?
Well, Harriet, firstly, I don't consider myself either remarkable or inspirational. I started my military career as a guy that left school with no qualifications, left the military with a master's level education, and subsequently went on to run 2 successful companies. I did that because I was given opportunities, I took opportunities, or I had to go and seek opportunities, and to be quite honest, I wasn't afraid of them. I used the knockbacks I've had on the way to learn from, but they made me more determined more than anything else. Yes, parts of my life have been really bumpy, but I'm still here despite a couple of attempts to knock me off the plot. But you can do it. My father used to say to me, you can do it. Now, not everything's achievable, not every objective is going to be met. You're not going to meet every challenge, but you can have a lot of fun on the way trying. But you don't have to be on your journey on your own. Taking people with you on whatever part of the journey is great fun as well. Whether it's part of a team, or whether it's just you're checking in every now and again with a mate, and he gives you a good piece of advice, as one of my mates generally tends to do. I wouldn't do it that way. Okay, well, why would you do it your way then? Okay, yeah, okay, learn that. But no, so but we are all human. We've all got our own life journeys, and I think we need to get as much out of our lives from a enjoyment, satisfaction perspective, because we're only here once, really.
Brian, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for sharing your story with us. It's inspirational, it is remarkable, and I'm sure there are many parts throughout your story that will resonate with many of our viewers. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Harriet. I've enjoyed it, and I hope people can take something away from the video.
Thank you.